Right. A warm welcome to those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Corporate Resources and Infrastructure Select Committee. My name is Councillor John Riley and I'm the chairman of this meeting. We'll come back to that later. Not my name, but the name of the committee. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and online under the live broadcast. For those of you present in the room and intend to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statement you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn the microphone button on, which I didn't, when speaking, and this will ensure that you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. A bit of housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm does go off, please follow our Democratic Services Officer to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts. Please note that councillors on the committee may use their laptops or tablets during the meeting to view the agenda and paperwork and anything else that they need to look at as far as the meeting is concerned. So we'll go around the table and everybody here can introduce themselves. We will start on this side with Councillor Garg.
Councillor Narendra
Councillor Stuart Mathers.
Anisha Tedji, Democratic Services.
Councillor Adam Bennett.
Councillor Kaushik Banerjee.
Councillor Farhad Chubdar.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so into the agenda. Apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Elizabeth Garrett.
Thank you. Declarations of interest in matters coming before the meeting. All the usual ones will be recorded anyway. Right, minutes of the previous meeting. So inevitably we've got a number. So the meeting held on the 9th of May, which was in fact the council AGM, which set this meeting up, or set this committee up, I should say. And as everyone will know, the previous transport and other issue committee was dissolved and essentially put into this committee. So we now have infrastructure and transport in this committee. This committee is called Corporate Resources and Infrastructure Select Committee. It did strike me that one of the, if not perhaps the principal responsibility that we have is still finance. And I think we really do need to indicate that. And I just wondered what everybody thought about this, of calling it the Finance, Corporate Resources and Infrastructure Select Committee, just to make that point. And to emphasise that is a very major part of what we do, because it was what we did before and not much has changed as far as that's concerned. So I think it's up to the committee to be happy with its name or add to it or alter it. So if everyone's happy with that, I think we should approach whoever's in charge of naming committees. Hopefully there's not a committee that sits to name committees, and see if we can't add at the top the word or the name finance, so we become the Finance, Corporate Resources, Infrastructure Select Committee. I think it just makes the point about what we do. I see nods from everybody, so if I can ask Anisha to have a look at that and see if we can't deal with it in that way. Anyway, the members of this committee were proposed at the council AGM, and it was all agreed in that bobbing up and down thing that we do. So everyone happy with that part of the minutes? Thank you very much. Then agenda item, that was 3, I suppose. 4 minutes of the Property, Highways and Transport Select Committee. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one, I'm afraid. These are the minutes of that committee that has been absorbed into this one. If you go to 75, item 75, which is on page 4 and 5 of that committee, which deals with present and future of the fleet, being the fleet of vehicles that the council operates. I don't know about anybody else, but I was extremely concerned that what was being reported then was that there were avoidable costs of something in the region of £800,000. It does seem to me that whatever else that committee was looking at the time, we really ought to very quickly look at that and see if there weren't ways in which we can address that very quickly. Digging into it a bit further, as I've been doing in the last few days, it does seem to me that there are a number of aspects of that avoidable spending that we can look at and drill down into. So I'm going to suggest that as soon as we can, possibly in the next meeting as well, that we have the fleet manager or I don't want to say director of procurement because the poor chap spent most of his time last year with us, but certainly somebody very much at the top of the fleet services managerial end come to talk to us, because I can't help but think that there are ways in which we can reduce that extraordinary amount of cost. There's no doubt that there will be, because it's a local authority and because of the way in which we have to operate, there will be certain repetitive costs. Big vehicles, small roads, double parking probably isn't a great mix. But nevertheless, I can't believe that we can't come up with ways of reducing that cost. So I think we need to look into that. It just struck me as being an extraordinary thing to be there. But we've got that series of minutes, and I would like to look into that pretty closely.
Agreed.
Is that right?
Minutes agreed.
Yeah, minutes agreed. Oh, Councillor Bennett.
The only thing on agreeing the minutes is that none of the councillors here were actually present. So I don't know if we have to defer that. Councillor Gaelic was the only member of the committee, of the current committee, who was at that meeting.
That's true, but I think because it's... Was Councillor Farr, were you on that one?
No, I was on the transport.
Okay, all right. Well, look, to the extent that we can, because it's here, I suppose we can agree the fact that we've read them and that we take note of them. The extent that we weren't there when it happened, so we can't agree it. There may be some technical issue around that, which Councillor Bennett raises quite rightly. But to whatever extent we can agree them, I'm sure Anisha can record whatever it is that we're able to do. And it may be that what she needs to do is to go back to the original councillors and just make sure they're happy with it, and then we can record that. I'm not sure. Okay, all right. So that was that one, and then we go on to agenda item 5, which were, as it were, our previous minutes, which are on page 7, and you'll recall that well, most of you will recall that the transformation team came to talk to us, and that was, I just remember that being a really good session where we got down to a lot of detail about what was going on, and we also resolved that we would keep that very much under review and have those officers back. And as ever, we got a really good presentation from the officers there, and also our Chief Digital Information Officer talked to us about cyber security, which everyone was very impressed with, and lots of questions about that. So we'll come back to that as well. All right, so are those minutes agreed? Agreed. All right, thank you. Right, so in terms of order, I haven't mentioned this before, but I think since we have our officer here in relation to item 8, I think we'll move item 8 up the agenda and take that next if we can, and have the presentation. And thank you for coming this evening. I suppose I really ought to confirm that all the items in part 1 will be in public. There aren't any part 2s, but if there were, they would be considered in private. So that deals with item 6. So if we move 8 up to the next part so that we can hear your presentation. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. So, can I stand up? Is that okay? I'll try and stay near the microphone. Yeah. Okay, so my name's Kirsty Newham. I'm the Emergency Management and Response Service Manager for the London Borough of Hillingdon. I've been doing that since 2020. Prior to that, I was a sergeant with the Metropolitan Police working in Met Command and Control. So my entire professional career has been spent responding to emergencies. So I'll be talking to you a little bit today about how the local authority responds to emergencies and its legal duties in relation to emergencies and major incidents, which is very timely given that Friday marks the 7-year anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. So it's a timely presentation. So I will talk first a little bit about the background of the service. So why does the council have the Emergency Management and Response Service? Well, because we legally have to. So there's a piece of legislation called the Civil Contingencies Act 2004, which places statutory duties on local authorities to be able to plan for, respond to and recover from what it defines as emergencies. That being an event or situation which poses serious damage to human welfare, the environment, or war or terrorism which threatens the security of the United Kingdom. So we're here because we have to be, and to assist the local authority in fulfilling its statutory duties, they set up the Emergency Management and Response Service. So what does that piece of legislation say the local authority legally has to do? Well, you can see those statutory requirements on the slide in front of you there. So legally, we have to assess the likelihood of emergencies occurring. So we have to do some horizon scanning for risks. So the threats and hazards which might cause emergencies to occur. We have to have in place emergency plans, which are documents designed to get the right people at the right place, at the right time, with the right resources. We have to have in place business continuity management arrangements to ensure that we can continue to deliver our services in the event of any disruptions. We have to have in place arrangements to warn and inform the public in the event of emergencies, so that they can keep themselves safe. We have to share information with other local responders, so those are traditionally your blue light services, so your ambulance services, your police services, your fire services, etc. But of course there are other statutory responders. If you'd like a full list of those, go and see the Civil Contingencies Act, there's quite a lot. We legally have to cooperate with our other local responders as well to enhance coordination and efficiency when we're dealing with emergencies. And we have to provide advice and assistance to businesses and the voluntary sector when it comes to business continuity. So these are our legal duties. These are the things we have to do. So how do we do those in Hillingdon? How do we deliver on those duties? So we maintain something called the Hillingdon Multi-Agency Community Risk Register, which gives you a full list of the threats and hazards which are likely to cause emergencies, and then it also talks about the likelihood of those risks occurring and what mitigations are in place to stop those risks occurring or to deal with them if they do occur. We have, of course, emergency plans, so we create, review and validate those plans. So not only do we write them, we exercise them to test their validity, to make sure that the arrangements are fit for purpose. We have in place business continuity plans, and a template is given out to every single service across the council, and they have to fill those in. But of course those are audited, again to make sure that they are fit for purpose and stand up in the event of an emergency. In terms of how we warn and inform the public in relation to emergencies, of course we utilise our website because people can access that 24/7 from wherever they're located, provided they have internet access. And we also have something called the Corporate Communications Emergency Plan, which details how the council will communicate internally to its own staff when emergencies happen and how they will communicate externally with residents, businesses and other responders, etc. How do we share information with other local responders when emergencies happen for the purposes of coordination? Well, I chair and provide the secretariat function for something called the Hillingdon Resilience Forum, or the HRF. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with local resilience forums. They are statutory bodies, multi-agency bodies made up of Category 1 and Category 2 responders as per the Civil Contingencies Act. So your blue light partners, your utility companies, your transport providers, telecommunications company, charities, voluntary sector, they're large forums. Ours has about 84 members, so they are quite large bodies. In terms of cooperating with other local responders, again, we do that through the Hillingdon Resilience Forum. So we do things like multi-agency training and exercising. So we've got one coming up in October, for example, to test our Resilience Forum capabilities to respond to a terror incident if it were to happen in the London Borough of Hillingdon. And not only that, we maintain something called our Emergency Management Command Structure, which is a structure which has capabilities to respond to emergencies 24/7, 365 days of the year, and I go into that a little bit more later on in the presentation. And in terms of business continuity management advice to businesses and the public, we do that via our website as well. So I told you that to enable our response to emergencies, we maintain an emergency management command structure. We operate on the nationally recognised emergency management model of bronze, silver, gold. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but it is a standardised emergency management model, as I said, nationally recognised. All the emergency services operate on the exact same model, so that makes multi-agency working and interoperability a lot more efficient. So how is that activated then? So how do we know an emergency is happening and a response is required from the council? Well, it will usually come in one of 2 or 3 routes. So the emergency services will usually either directly call our bronze officer, which internally we label as the emergency response officer. So they are either notified directly, and we operate a bottom upwards activation scale. Bronze will notify silver, silver will notify gold. So they will either directly operate and activate the bronze, or they will call Anchor. You know who Anchor are, right? Our out-of-hours contact centre provider. So if it's out of hours, the emergency services may call our contact centre, who they then may in turn activate the emergency response officer. Sometimes if the emergency happens in hours, the emergency services, because they have a relationship with me and my service, will call me directly, and then I will activate the necessary council services. But that only happens sometimes. The official route is to go via our emergency response officer. So once that call is received, our ERO will make an assessment as to what, if any, council actions are required in relation to the emergency, and then they will go about coordinating the relevant council services which need to respond. Does that all make sense so far? I haven't lost any of you. I'm trying to keep it as simple and concise as I can make it, because emergency management is fairly complex. So I'll talk about some of the emergencies that the council has responded to in the last 12 months, just so you can get a snapshot of the kind of things it deals with. So in terms of risk, generally we respond most commonly to floods and fires. If you look at the community risk register, they're both judged as very high risk for the London Borough of Hillingdon. So 9 times out of 10, if we're dealing with an emergency, it's a flood or a fire. However, in April, this happened, and it did make the local news. I'm not sure if you read about it. So this happened at Paddington Close in Hayes. Unfortunately, a car collided with a residential premises, and in the process of that, a gas mains was damaged, which necessitated utilities to be isolated and homes to be evacuated, because a 100-metre cordon was actually implemented. So all the residents that lived within that cordon needed to be evacuated by the emergency services. But because of the nature of the incident, there was concerns over the safety and the stability of the house. If they took out the car, would the house collapse? So the emergency services called our emergency response officer, who deployed down to the incident scene to act as the liaison point between the local authority and the emergency services. They then in turn activated the local authority's dangerous structures engineer, or the DSE as it's shortened to, who provided critical advice to the fire service about how to make that building safe once they took the car out, which they obviously had to do. And the residents from the directly impacted property and the property directly next door were spoken to and advised that they needed to stay with family or friends whilst the building was made safe and until the emergency services informed them it was safe to go back. So this is one of the more niche emergencies. Thankfully, these types of incidents are relatively rare, but these things do happen. And in case you're wondering, nobody was injured. Nobody had to be taken to hospital. There were no fatalities and no casualties, thankfully, as a result of this incident. Just a very badly damaged house and a gas main. So something that happened in March, which actually didn't make the news, which I was surprised by, was a suspected unexploded World War II ordnance. I'm sure you've heard about these because they are relatively common in London, obviously London being a big target for the Nazis in World War II. So as a result of this device, which was found in a residential garden, the Met Police had to implement a 200-metre cordon, which is quite large. When you're talking about an urban area, 200 metres encompasses a large amount of properties and a large amount of buildings. So we had to evacuate around 250 residents. So whilst the Met were awaiting their explosive ordnance team, who come down and assess the device, see whether it's safe, whether it's not, they called the local authority because they said, hey, we might need some help with these 250 residents. We might need you to provide shelter for them if this goes on for a long time. Because if that was an actual device, then they would have had to decide how to safely deal with that device. Usually they explode it where it is, so it's a deliberate explosion, or they will take it out, and sometimes they take it out to an area where it's safe to explode it. If it's a coastal area, Plymouth, did you hear about what happened in Plymouth? We're going to take the device out to the sea, weren't they? So they do controlled explosions. So they said if that's the case, this could go on for a long time. So what we had to do in that case is we had to brief all of our emergency management command structure. The Met called me personally. I had to brief our gold, our silver, our bronze, our rest centre managers, so all our roles we could keep on call, to say if this goes on for a protracted amount of time, we may need to start opening emergency rest centres. So places where residents can go to evacuate and shelter and get light food and refreshment and sleep if it's necessary, and that kind of thing. And of course we had to identify locations to do that as well. So if we were going to open up rest centres, where can we do that, and how do we get the staff to do that? So that was all the work that was going on behind the scenes. But thankfully it was a practice round. So it wasn't a live round, so the Met were able to, within 3 hours, bring everybody back, ring up everybody and say it's safe to go back to your homes, this isn't a World War II bomb. So that was great. But just another niche example of the kind of things that we deal with. And then last year, back in June, we had this incident. I don't know if the video will play, but I'll play. It made BBC News.
Evacuated from their homes after a fire in 2 neighbouring houses in Hillingdon last night. Around 70 firefighters fought the fire on Mint Close. There are no reports of any injuries. Locals were told to keep windows shut because of the large amount of smoke. An investigation into the cause is now underway.
So that was caused by people unsafely disposing of smoking materials. So Mint Close was actually a major fire. So as we said in the video clip, there were 70 firefighters taken from the local area, not just Hillingdon. I think we had some, as you can see there, from Wembley attending the scene. They used some new tech equipment to fight the fire from above, a 32-metre turntable ladder, which is a new piece of equipment the fire brigade got after Grenfell Tower, because tackling a fire from height can sometimes be more effective. So in that event we had to evacuate about 40 residents from the local area, and we had to set up a rest centre, so somewhere for those evacuated residents because of the time. It was in the early hours of the day. We had to open up a rest centre. We used a nearby school. So fortunately, among the evacuees, there was a teacher at a nearby school who facilitated local authority access to the school hall. Our ERO was deployed down to the scene to start registering and looking after the welfare of those 40 residents, so doing needs assessments, those kind of things. Fortunately, within about 3.5 hours, the fire brigade had the fire under control and residents were safely able to go back to their homes. There were just a couple of properties that you can see down there, 40 and 41, who were advised to go and find alternative accommodation. Of course, if they were council tenants or they couldn't provide their own accommodation, that's where we get in touch with our housing colleagues and we find suitable accommodation for those residents. But luckily they were able to accommodate themselves by staying with family and friends. So that is a very, very brief snapshot of the kinds of things that the emergency management team deals with. That's as brief as I could make it and as concise as I could make it. Have you got any questions about anything I've said in this presentation or how Hillingdon deals with emergencies and major incidents more generally?
All right, thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for it's a really insightful presentation. There's loads of questions I could ask you, but I don't want to keep you here all evening. But I didn't realise that the bronze, silver, gold was actually quite a well-used. We use that where I work. In my day job, I didn't realise that it was used nationally as well. So, in terms of the on-call rota, I'm guessing, do you have people in a long list of departments across the council where you have an on-call rota 24/7 that somebody is there as your kind of go-to?
Yeah, so it's an on-call duty rota system for all of the roles that we keep on call. So that's bronze. I kept it simple and basic for you, but it's actually bronze, silver, a borough emergency control centre manager, a rest centre manager, and a gold as well. So there's 5 roles that my service is responsible for keeping on call to respond to emergencies.
And just one more, if you don't mind, Chair. So relative to other London boroughs, just thinking about Hillingdon, 2 airports, one of the largest geographical boroughs in Greater London, do we have a higher risk level than neighbouring boroughs or not? Or is it actually quite like for like?
So the risks vary, of course, depending on exactly what you said. You know, I'm mindful everything's being recorded, but I don't want to, it's not about scaremongering, but creating a realistic picture, you could argue yes, because having Heathrow, it's the biggest transport hub in the United Kingdom. That comes with its own risks, right? So aviation risks, aviation collisions, fires. We've actually got a couple of control of major accident hazard sites or coma sites. I don't know if you know what those are, but by very nature of what they do and the volume of chemicals that they've got on there, they bring inherent risk to the airport too. But of course it comes with its own risk of increased counter-terror risk at transport hubs, crowded places we know are targets for those who wish to do harm. So yeah, in a way we have RAF Northolt like you mentioned, so yeah, that comes with increased risk. Yeah, I can't say no.
Thank you.
Councillor Banerjee.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to echo what Councillor Bennett said in terms of that report. That was really detailed and interesting, so thank you for sharing. Not to, again, maybe scaremonger or cause panic. If, for example, we had 2 of those incidents that you showed during the presentation in the north and south of the borough on the same day, what's the capacity of the team to do sort of deal with multiple emergencies at the same time? Yeah, thank you.
In terms of concurrent emergencies, we would be limited, we would struggle, absolutely, which is where mutual aid comes into place. So across London we have standardised mutual aid arrangements, so should we need to borrow resources in terms of equipment or personnel from other London local authorities, that's a standardised process. So we've got those arrangements in place, they are well rehearsed, all London local authorities understand them, so we would fall back on our mutual aid arrangements. However, according to best practice, so the resilience standards for London, which set out what good looks like in terms of emergency management and resilience, we should be able to hold our own response for a minimum of 48 hours before we start asking for outside help in the form of mutual aid or commercial providers or whatever. But yeah, so could we cope for 48 hours with a concurrent emergencies? Depends on the size, scale and complexity, is the honest answer. It's circumstantial. But this is an under-resourced area. Emergency management, if you look at how they're resourced in terms of West London, for example, Hounslows emergency management team is made up of 6 members of staff. In Hillingdon we have 2. So we don't resource this area very well, so we would probably be quicker than other London local authorities to need mutual aid and to need assistance, and a diminished capacity to deal with concurrent emergencies compared to neighbours.
So what I think what will be interesting, we always find this when we go to these sort of specialist areas. They're very sort of interesting and cause us a great deal of interest. Is there a sort of I don't know, yearly number of emergencies? I mean, you've shown us some, and I was thinking that maybe, and we haven't had this before, but maybe once every 6 months or every year we get a list from you of the emergencies that you've covered, just so that we get a bit of a handle on the sort of work resource that's involved in all this. But I mean, over the last, you may not know this, but I mean, over the last, let's say, 5 years, has there been a kind of number of because these emergencies, from what you've said, range across a lot of different things, and that's another question. What counts as an emergency that you would be brought into? Because I mean, you've got from a car crash to a fire to a bomb. I mean, those are 3 different, very different things. So it would be useful, I think, for us to just have a bit of knowledge about the index of the emergencies that you've had over that time period. Mm-hmm. But more especially to have an update, maybe every 6 months of the or yearly of the emergencies covered in the past. But I mean, just to get an idea about the sort of volume of things that are referred to you. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, that's fine. I'd say I could give you roughly. It's probably about 3 a month, and they tend to be fires. 3 a month. Yeah.
Okay. And are all fires reported to you as potential emergencies?
No, of course, not all emergencies require a local authority response. So sometimes, if it's only affecting private residents and no action is needed on behalf of the local authority, we're kept out of the loop entirely. I'd say the majority of emergencies, the emergency services deal with in isolation. It's just when the council need to do something that the council get called and we respond.
And places, as Councillor Bennett referred to, like Heathrow or any of the other sort of large facilities that we have in Hillingdon, that they would presumably have their own emergency response teams on the ground. From a national perspective of some description, they wouldn't all rely on us, would they?
So Heathrow actually has its own fire service. Yeah. It has aviation policing up there. It has counter-terror police up there. It has ambulance staff very nearby the airport on standby. So yes, and they have their own resilience team. And we also part fund the Heathrow Travel Care, which provides humanitarian assistance if there's an emergency at the airport. So opening up their own rest centres, etc., etc. So meeting any kind of humanitarian needs. That was came in very handy during Operation Pitting, if you know what that was, the repatriation of people who had Afghan nationals who'd assisted the Allied forces in Afghanistan. Back in, was that 2022 it was, wasn't it? So Heathrow Travel Care came in really handy when that was the case, because obviously you had a lot of traumatised individuals who'd been through high stress situations, so they were relied upon quite heavily.
And presumably Northolt also, from the RAF point of view, they would have their own response?
Yeah, RAF, of course they do, yeah. They're well versed with, by very nature of what they do there at dealing with emergencies. But we work in close collaboration with them to test in the multi-agency capacity our emergency response arrangements.
I mean, some time ago, and I can't remember which committee it was now, it could have even been a former committee that I chaired, we had a presentation from an officer who dealt with potential terrorism responses come and talk to us, so a council officer. So presumably you're in contact with them in case anything like that happens.
So I can only think that must have been either my predecessor, so the person who did my job before me, or potentially someone within the Prevent network, potentially. I'm not sure who that would have been. But yes, obviously terror falls under my kind of remit as an emergency.
All right, so that's now in your purview, is it?
It is, yes.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. Okay. All right, any, Councillor Bennett? Oh, sorry. Councillor Mathers. I was turning to you anyway.
Thank you, Chair. No, I do appreciate that. We've met quite a lot, the previous iteration of part of this committee met quite a lot with our digital officer. I think I talk about cybersecurity far too often in these committees, but obviously that's a newer, emerging, ever-evolving risk when it comes to disruption, terror and other aspects. I suppose the two parts of my question, one is how to keep on top of all of that when it's such an evolving world, and the second part is I'm assuming we, within our structures and processes, deal with emergencies where we would have no access to any of the technology potentially in scenarios. So I know that we're increasingly relying on AI and other factors. Well, if all of that was hacked and disappeared, the contact centre may not function at all, for example. So I don't need any detail because we're obviously in a public setting, but just a sense of how the world is changing with technology.
Yeah, of course. That is one of the largest threats that London, the country, the world faces, cyber attacks. So increasingly things are done online, aren't they? And we know that from what's been happening in the news recently, right? The cyber attack on the NHS and the huge impacts. The NHS declared a critical incident. So yes, that is an increasing, emerging, large threat. And that's where the cyber response framework comes in handy. So London has in place a cyber response framework which details how it should respond if it faces itself as a target or a victim of a cyber attack. But that is also where business continuity plans come in place. So you said, how would a service function if we had no IT, we had no digital? That's what a business continuity plan should outline. That is one of the contingencies we have to plan for. How would your service function if we lost not just IT systems but power altogether? What if there's a national power outage, which is, increasingly likely given global events, and I don't need to say more on that, but our access to power has somewhat been called to question, hasn't it, with global events? So national power outage could cause all power to go down, so you'd have no phones, toilets wouldn't flush, traffic lights wouldn't work. So yeah, highlights the importance of a thorough, valid, capable, effective business continuity plan.
I'm being waved at by Councillor Chippendale. Off you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually wanted to echo what Councillor Mathers said, that digital emergency, is that under your remit?
Yeah, so that is absolutely part of our Hillingdon multi-agency community risk register. So yes, cyber attacks are very much there. We very much understand that is one of the biggest threats facing London. Of course, Hillingdon's part of London, so it's definitely on the radar and definitely in the risk register.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Banerjee.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on an earlier part of your presentation in terms of the risk register and something mentioned around mitigation and likelihood.
Yeah.
How often do you refresh that risk register, and do you also look at maybe what's happening in other councils?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Moses.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds as if a lot of our plans and remits are all within, Hillingdon being part of London. I still put Middlesex on my address just because I'm defiant that we're going to keep some of it, and which means that we're on the border at the very edge of London, where we don't travel too far towards the middle of London and surrounded by a number of different counties. Does that cause any barriers or problems when it comes to joint working, because it is different regions?
Well, you say Surrey, and that's good, but of course nearer to us is Hertfordshire and Bucks and Beds, I suppose. So Bucks, Beds and Herts are in that sense our nearest neighbours, and I agree with the Honourable Member for Middlesex that most of us do cling on to this notion of a county, which of course it was many, many years ago, which stretches all the way, I think, from sort of Staines, the other side of Twickenham, right round, and we're the sort of furthest outpost of the Middlesex Empire. So Surrey would be like the furthest away, I guess, of the counties. And it would make a lot more sense, wouldn't it, if there was a network of emergency response capacity that we shared with the counties that border us, and in particular that border Hillingdon, because I suppose proportionately, being nearer to central London than they are, maybe we get more potential emergencies than perhaps they do. Maybe there's a different, I don't know, but it would make sense to have that link with the counties that do border us. And would that be helpful? Because from that point of view and from a sort of response point of view, it would make a lot more sense for them to be involved with the outer London boroughs, and certainly with from our perspective with us, just to have that capacity, I suppose. And whilst we've got London councils, you've also got the wider Local Government Association, and to work through those broader organisations, you wouldn't want to go much further than the immediate counties that border us, of course. But it's it would almost be quicker to call upon Bucks, Beds and Herts than it would be some of the London councils, because we're nearer to them. All right, and it may be finally, but I was just thinking that, again, we hear from other officers across the various departments. I know you said you've only got, as it were, 2 in your specific department, but other officers who clearly would play into responding to emergencies. Our digital transformation officer, who we hear from quite a lot and who we heard from last time, in terms of expertise, and so forth. So I just wonder if there's a bit of work to be done on internal synergy between different departments, and maybe bringing them together with the sort of work that you do. And are the senior managers in those departments receptive to that sort of idea? You can tell us, no one's watching.
I think they are with the theory. The theory, yes, but in reality, everybody has so much responsibility and increasing workload that committing any time, if we have to ask for anyone's time, so the theory and the reality are two different things.
That's very interesting. All right, thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on, I suppose, the residents of the borough. So I never used to have a torch, and then it was about 18 months ago when there was talk around this power outage, and there'll be blackouts, and we'll be going back to the 70s, and you have to turn everything off for 2 hours of an evening. I got a torch, and then I was listening to the radio the other day, and I can't remember which MP it was, but they were talking around, people should have a month's worth of tinned food, and you think back to the toilet rolls in COVID and everything. So there's a balance of not in sort of installing panic buying and people being fearful unnecessarily. But whose responsibility is it to make sure residents are prepared? Do we kind of leave that to central government? Is it a Mayor of London, Greater London thing? Is it a local council thing to say, do you know what, actually, as a resident in Hillingdon, in the times that we are in that are increasingly uncertain, there are some fundamental basics that you should have in your house and you should be prepared for?
All right, Councillor Banerjee.
Very quick one. Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on what Councillor Bennett said, and maybe we have to take this offline. Are there incidents when we can't support because of limited resources?
We've been fortunate enough in my time, no, that hasn't been the case. But obviously, my concern, given my subject matter expertise, is what if we did have a major incident? As I said, 7-year anniversary of Grenfell Town on this Friday. If we had a larger scale, more complex, what we call major incident, Hillingdon will struggle, because that will require protracted response, which Hillingdon will struggle with in terms of resources. So that is my concern, is yes, we can deal with the small residential fires and the small localised floods. We are less prepared to deal with the larger scale, more complex major incidents.
But I suspect that that's true of a lot of authorities.
Yeah.
So, unless, which we're not, all London authorities are in a position to put greater resources into your area, commonality of working and being able to draw on the wider picture has got to be the way to go. It's a shame, but it's the way of the world. So that going down that route of greater cooperation between different authorities, going I always forget which way it is, east-west and north-south, as it were, and having a go-to and readily accessible plan that means that, you know, if we're called on, we can help out whoever, and if we're called on, we can go to others. Is really has got to be the model, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And is that good enough at the moment or not? All right. Well, in the absence of any other questions, that's been very, very informative and really, really helpful as ever. And I'm sure we'll come back to you on other things. But yeah, I think the idea of giving us a periodic update on what's happened in the past would be useful, because I suspect because of the good work you do, we wouldn't know about it. But otherwise, thank you so much, and that's been really, really very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to speak to you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye 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 bye. All right. So, item number 7, I think. Introduction to the Corporate Resources and Infrastructure Select Committee and its remit. I think that's you, isn't it? Excellent. Good. I'm sorry I'm sounding a bit like some sort of ancient movie star with my croaky voice, but we'll persist as long as we can. All right.
Thanks, Chair. So this is a new committee, and this report seeks to provide information on the committee's terms of reference, its remit, recent and current activity undertaken by not only this select committee but other select committees, and the report also provides a full breakdown of the service areas which falls under this committee's remit. So it's just an introduction report just to kind of set the basis of the committee and provide guidance on what kind of areas we might want to look into in the future. Thanks, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
All right, good. Well, as I mentioned earlier on, there's a lot in our remit. You look at the relevant service areas, 18 heads, and each one of those inevitably has got a lot of different areas underneath them. So it is a lot to do. I know the members of this committee very well, and I know that you don't need to be told, but I'll mention it just for the sake of it in a sense, and so that anyone watching understands. But it's going to be absolutely vital that everybody studies and understands and reads the papers well in advance, because we're not going to have time to, as it were, do it on the day. There's a lot to do, and so we need to pick out those areas which are the most important to us, but equally some will be relatively small, relatively focused in terms of what we look at. Clearly we can't do all 18, clearly we can't do everything within the 18, but nevertheless, and also our direct links to the Cabinet are the leader and 3 Cabinet members. I've already started speaking to the leader and the various Cabinet members responsible. And I think it's useful, as we've done in the past, to get ideas about the most pressing areas of interest for us to look at. Obviously, we're independent and we can look at whatever we want, but it's, as we did with procurement, which was really good and really very well received and extremely well researched and offered. There's no point in looking at things that are not of interest to the Cabinet and won't be acted on. It's useful to have things that will be. But a combination of ideas from Cabinet members, ideas from very senior directors and from us is the answer, and that's worked really, really well in the past and enabled us to look at very important areas. As I said before, I would like to use part of the next meeting to drill down into that 800,000 spend issue with regard to the fleet, and perhaps we can get someone along to talk to us about that, so we can do that. The other thing is that given the complexity of the areas we look at, and indeed, as I say, the volume, I think it would be useful for us to be able to, and this is not for preparation purposes, although it is in a sense, is to have questions in advance. Obviously on the night we'll ask questions that come as a result of presentations, but I think in general circumstances, if we can, once we've alighted on a programme, if we can send Anisha in advance of any particular meeting a range of questions for our witnesses or those who come before us to answer questions, again, that will be helpful as a starting point, and then we can pick things up as supplementaries as well. There's absolutely no question that we will do that, but I just think that will be of assistance to focus our minds as well. So with that in mind, and I'm not going to, I mean, it may be people do have ideas, but I'm not going to necessarily ask immediately for that. You can send them to me and Anisha for consideration in terms of the sort of things we want to look at. We've got the forward plan, which has already been a bit populated with things for us, or our work programme rather, not the forward plan. But I'm very, very confident with the members of this committee we can look at the sort of stuff that we need to. Inevitably, there are a couple of meetings that we devote to the budget and to finance. Another reason for putting the name finance at the top. So there we are. I think that's really all I want to say about that aspect of it. But if anyone's got any questions for Anisha, do ask. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. It was just, and I think this is right, otherwise it wouldn't be there. Business administration, including mortuary. Is this mortuary as in the sense that I am thinking of, or is something different? It's just the most random thing. You have exec assistants and PAs, business support, the post room, and the mortuary. Like, that probably is the way it is.
I believe it is, however, I can look into it and come back to you.
I think that it definitely is the actual mortuary. I think the reason it was put there originally, I think one of the reasons it was highlighted was during the pandemic, and I mean, fortunately, the pandemic didn't, in one sense, result in some of the concerns that were being looked into at the time. I know when I chaired external services, which was partly health and partly policing and other enforcement at the time, one of the big areas of concern was if there was going to be a need for extraordinary numbers of deaths to be dealt with in the London area, and certainly because of our particular facilities, it was thought that may need to be not only utilised to the full but also increased. So it may be that's why it still sits there as being an important area of consideration. And I think at some stage it was suggested that we should go and have a look at that particular surface. It's not something that we've done a lot of in the past, but now that we've got an enhanced number of areas of responsibility, I think there are quite a few areas within the council's purview that we probably ought to go and have a look at and have a decent understanding of as far as our own education is concerned. And that may be one of them. All right, thank you. That was item 7. We've done item 8. Item 9 is the road safety review. update. Now, this obviously came from our colleagues in the former committee, and you'll see there on item 9, page 23, what that report is about. Now, that report, as I understand it, has been written or is being written in relation to the previous committee. I need to speak to Councillor Burrows, who was chairman of that previous committee, and they did quite a bit of work in terms of a report being written and recommendations. So if you're all in agreement, I'll deal with that offline with Councillor Burrows and have a look at that report and the recommendations. If it's going to go to Cabinet, which I think it probably will, then, and should do, then it will, because that committee's been absorbed, or that committee's work has been absorbed into ours, it will go to Cabinet under our purview. But in any event, I think the idea is we see it, number 2, the recommendations is that the report to Cabinet will be done in consultation with the former chair and other members, just to make sure that they're happy with the findings and recommendations, and then I think I'll probably end up having to present it to Cabinet, or if we can find some sort of constitutional way, because they've done all the work, maybe myself and Councillor Burrows should do it, which would seem more sensible, frankly, since they did all the work on it. So noted and agreed. Thank you. All right. So that's that one.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee is asked to review the forward plan and make any comments. Thank you.
I think to a large extent it's for noting. I don't know if anyone's got any particular comments on it. For us to consider the Cabinet forward plan. I mean, there's a huge amount on there. I think really it's another thing that I tend to do with these is to winkle out the areas that specifically come across our desk, as it were. Again, now that we've got 3 Cabinet members plus the leader, quite a lot will. You'll also note, and of course it was there before, that in the terms of reference under cross-cutting topics, we also act as the lead select committee on the monitoring and review of resident experience in civic centre property and build assets. So again, it's another huge area for us to scrutinise and look at the work of utility companies and how their actions affect residents in the borough, where we often see that day to day, don't we? So if anybody has any comments about that now, fine, we can hear them, but otherwise I think in the past what we've done is, if anybody wants to deal specifically with any issue contained in the forward plan, send me an email or Anisha, and we'll have a look at those topics. All right. So that's that one. Noted and agreed.
Can I please make a comment?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Mathers.
Just on the reference 208 on page 3 of this, it talks about the Hillingdon digital strategy. We've done a lot of work with Matthew and going through a lot of things that he's kind of placed to prepare our minds and the minds of the council on this. I just wondered if it would be possible to find out if there's, as he's spoken to us at quite length, if there was anything new or evolving in that he might be able to just explain to us before it goes to Cabinet, in case we had any comments to feedback and support his report there. I think with strategies, it's always useful to have scrutiny feeding before the strategy, rather than trying to mend a strategy that's been agreed afterwards, because it's not particularly pragmatic. But I doubt there'll be anything new, because he's already revealed to us quite a lot of the journey. But just maybe a note to him and asking if there was anything that was a particularly slightly different direction or tweak that was necessary.
I think we said to him last time, didn't we, that and I think he anticipates this anyway, that I mean, he's very enthusiastic and is always hugely full of great ideas and new things that are cropping up as he sort of either discovers them or uncovers them or deals with them. So I don't say that we should have him at every meeting for a sort of update, but I think certainly in our, where are we now, June, in our July meeting possibly, or August meeting, just a quick update to see where we are. I don't know how that fits in with the timing of the issues that you're dealing with, but in a sense, because of the nature of it, whatever goes to Cabinet for them to consider, I suspect strongly that there'll always be a kind of degree of revision and extension. So yeah, I think we can get him back and get a bit of a brief update. But again, I think we're going to have to say to any officers that deal with any subject before us, in order that we can deal with it in the detail we need to. We're going to, and I'm very conscious of not requiring them to do more work, but at the same time to have maybe a slightly more detailed report from them in advance, so that we're not ended up asking questions that could be in a report in any event, and so that what we actually do is to drill down in relation to particular aspects rather than going into generalities. And so it can be assumed that we've read the report in advance, so we know about. And also, perhaps if we can set them a little bit of homework in advance in order to say, look, cover these areas for us in the report, and then we'll ask you about specific stuff when you get here. I think it's got to be the way to go, because otherwise we won't have time on the night to do everything that we will want to. And we are going to have to pack a bit in terms of topics that we deal with. And also, obviously, we need to pick a particularly significant topic, as we did with procurement, to drill down into and have a good detailed report with practical recommendations for Cabinet later. All right, good. So, did we do the road safety? Yeah, we did, didn't we? Where are we now? Work programme. Good, right, work programme. Well, really, it's a bit early, but because it's our first look at the work programme. This is agenda item 11. Our next meeting is at the end of July. Okay, 23rd of July. We've kind of looked at the road safety review, but we'll sort that out. We need to have a really good think about the various areas of interest for us. I see that my old friend, the electric vehicle infrastructure strategy, is on the programme. I dealt with that when I was in Cabinet. That was really very challenging. The other thing that we've been talking about is Cabinet member attendance. Well, of course, we've got, as I say, 3 Cabinet members who are our direct links in terms of their departments. At some stage, and it may be more sensible to have not necessarily all 3 together, but all 3 one after the other on a particular night, where we can talk to them about specific topics. But certainly a degree of interest has been shown in coming to the committee and having a discussion with the Cabinet members who are a direct link to this committee. I don't think it's possibly very practical to have kind of one on one meeting, one on another. I don't think it makes sense. But to have all 3 on one night, but individually, might be quite interesting. And to talk to them about various things. I know that different Cabinet members do have appeared before other select committees, and there's no reason why, from everything I've heard, that ours shouldn't either. So that's something to plan for in the future. But as I say, if all members can submit ideas and topics for us to look at, I would like, as I said this 2 times now, or twice even, to look at this business about the fleet in our July meeting. I really do think it's something that we can make a big impact on. And then we'll go from there. All right, any comments?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add that we do have a digital transformation update from Matthew at the November meeting, so that's already on the work programme. And I will liaise with officers to see if we can get an update report on the fleet for the July meeting, and I'll update you, Chair.
A report certainly, but I think we need somebody here to the fleet manager or somebody to talk to us about that. I think November's probably a bit far off. Maybe I don't know.
September decision.
September. Okay. All right. Well, let's see if we can get Matthew here for September. That'd be quite useful because I mean there was so much that he told us last time, which was quite interesting. All right. Any comments? Nope. Thank you very much. And I think that deals with everything. And if it does, thank you very much, everybody.